I don't know what it is about fabrics this season, but for some reason, I have really been working with a lot of fabric projects. I think we just get on these kicks as crafters that we start doing something and we can do that over and over and over until we get tired of those type of projects and move on to something else. But recently it's been fabric. A lot of them are driven by reusing scrap materials. So that's what I was going to take a look at today. I end up with lots of scraps because I am a quilter. And whenever I have scrap pieces, even these sizes, I just feel bad throwing them away, just throwing them in the trash. I tend to hold on to my fabric scraps. The other thing I have a lot of, because again, I'm a quilter, is batting. I end up with batting scraps to be able to use for different projects. And today I am just going to go over a few of my scrap busting things that I do in order to be able to use these up in a fun way. The first thing I do is I will cut a fairly large piece of batting to work with. I don't measure it. All I am doing is creating a larger piece of fabric that I may be able to pull to use for something else in the future. I do use my fabric Mod Podge, which I am about out. I love this, even though it has got the name of the fabric and the, I guess whoever created that or who manufactures that, I still love that because I think it's so much fun to have the word Love Struck. So I'm actually going to keep that piece. These little pieces like this, you know, they show the different colors that are used within the fabric itself. And how cute is that? It's got 3 cute little houses on there. I'm going to go ahead and just lay down some of my fabric Mod Podge on a strip here. Maybe an inch or 2 wide just to start working. And you could sew these if you wanted to. I just find that I can do this anywhere I'm at without a sewing machine. And if I want to add stitches, I can add stitches later. This is just a very convenient way to be able to do this. You can see this isn't even perfectly straight, but for what I'm doing right now, that is just fine. The other thing you might notice that I do is whenever I collect my fabric scraps, I try to organize them in a fashion that similar colors are grouped together. So colors that I feel like I can use together have already been put in a certain order. If you have a longer scrap, you just add it in here. And even the strings don't bother me. If you're somebody, once you see how this project comes together, if the strings bother you, then you trim them off. But that kind of stuff does not bother me. See, I think that little edge is fun. So I'm going to keep that to where we can definitely see it, where it's just a little, the edge piece on the fabric. Once I get to this point, I am just going to trim this up just a little bit. Now these are my fabric scissors, so I do not want to get anywhere close to where there was any glue at. I want to make sure that I am just trimming up just the fabric material for the moment. We will trim it up better later. Let's just put that to the side. Now this scrap I will keep. These, I'll just keep all these scraps. We're going to lay this to the side and we are going to let this dry at least for 2 hours. I tend to make these different ones and then I just put them to the side to use for future projects. So these are 2 that have already been made and waiting in the wings for a little bit. This one will go to the side to dry. And here is one that I just made for today's video. I wanted something smaller to work with without cutting into something that I may use for a larger project later. Now, one of my favorite things to do with this scrap fabric, all these scrappies, once I have them on that big sheet, then I will pull those and cut those down into tag shapes and create tags. Here are some that I've created that really I have not embellished at all at this point. And then I have a few. This one was cut into a shape instead of a tag that I've already done something with. I used my stamps to create a little background. I've used my fabric paint to paint on some stitches, although I could have totally sewn those on. But sometimes I just don't want to drag out my sewing machine for different projects. So this one I did put through the sewing machine, and I used fabric paint on that. So you have all kinds of ways to embellish these. You've got another little heart that I cut out, and this little guy. So let's take a look at just creating one of these real quick. I do have a tag. This is a practice tag that I use. I also use it to help me cut out a lot of my tag shapes. And we are just going to cut that one down. So I am going to start with the top, and I need to figure out, which side do I want to be the top and which side do I want to be the bottom. I like this little design at the bottom a little bit better, so I'm going to leave that one. And I'm just going to start by trimming away all this extra fabric. Now, if I was not videoing, I would actually use my rotary cutter. This is what I would be using on my self-healing mat. Not everybody has this type of equipment, so we are just going to cut it down using scissors. These used to be my favorite scissors. They need sharpening, so I had to grab another pair of scissors to work with this because those were just not doing it for me. It is important that you use scissors that are sharp, right? And I am just going to take this and I'm just going to round this off a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to make this look like a tag, right? Now, next, if you take a look at these, because they are tags, I do like to have a little top of some sort added to them. So using a hole punch, unless you have a really good hole punch, it is really hard to cut a hole in this fabric and get through all of that. I like to add my little tag hanger. I'm not sure what else you call that. What else would you call that? Anyway, and the way I do that is that I add a piece of fabric to the back. So let me just get a piece of fabric that I think matches. And for that, I just go to my larger scraps. So again, these are all quilting scraps. They're just quilting scraps of different sizes. So you have that white, that could be cute. I have this same material right here. And is this one used in there? I have that one. So let me just see which one I prefer to use. These are bigger scraps, so I will probably save those for a different project, and I'm going to use a smaller scrap to do this. This one, we'll use that. So see, this is already a piece that was cut. If I wanted to, I could go ahead and iron that, but for today's project, I am just not going to worry about it. You could sew this to keep this together. But again, not everyone has a sewing machine. So not everyone has Fabric Mod Podge, but Fabric Mod Podge is a lot less expensive than going to buy a sewing machine. And you could probably use any kind of Mod Podge for this project. Fabric Mod Podge does a couple of things. It doesn't make your fabric quite as rigid as a regular glue might, and it is washable. Not that these are going to be washed, but the biggest thing that I like about using Fabric Mod Podge for fabric is that the texture is better than using the regular Mod Podge or a different type of glue that's not really made for fabric. But if you only have regular Mod Podge or heck, even, or school glue, like a school glue, you could go ahead and try it with that. Now, I do like to shape my little hanger where I know I'm going to see the prettier part in the front. So if you're concerned about that, just make sure that you get that facing the correct direction. Put a little bit more on there. I want to line that up in the corner the very best that I can, and that's just going to save me from having to make extra cuts later. So the only thing that would be left to do from here to get my tag actually ready is once it is dry, I will go in with scissors and I will cut that back fabric down, and then this tag would be ready. If you were making several tags, you could go ahead and lay them all out on here and then cut them all out at one time. So just keep that in mind. All right, I'm going to set this to the side to dry. Next, so I have these that have not been embellished at this point. Sometimes I like to save these to embellish them when I know what I'm going to do with them. Does that make sense? Because these can go in journals, they could go on a gift, they could go in a card as a bookmark as you're doing some snail mail so that you have an extra special little treat in there. There's just a lot of different things that you could use these for. I want to use this one. I love this one. So let's just go in and embellish one of these. And to do that, to get started, I am going to just grab my fabric paint. All right. And you shouldn't use your paints out of the lids. You should put them in a paint tray. But I just don't always do what I'm supposed to do. So there you go. Let's see. Where's my little tag I was using? And I could just put stitches on here if I wanted to. And I'm just doing straight stitches here, but if you wanted it to look like a zigzag stitch or some fancy stitch, you could certainly try to do that. But today we are just going to keep it, do some simple things just to get these embellished. And I am actually using, like I said, quilting fabrics. But if you have old shirts or old things that you're throwing away, sometimes those things aren't even really, they have holes in them or whatever. They're really not in the best quality to even be donated. You can rip those fabrics apart. If you just don't have scrap fabrics lying around, you could always do something like just reuse old clothing. So that was just one simple way to do something with that. You could use a dot maker. You could use, let me pull that other one back. I actually painted on a little bit. Here it is. I used a paintbrush just to make some squiggly marks. I used this little scalloped edge and you could dip that in paint and do something. So I think I'm going to do that actually. And I just don't have a paint tray with me right now, so I am just going to use my paintbrush just to paint these scalloped edges real quick. We'll just put maybe a couple of those, maybe on this big yellow area, and just like that little design that adds. But you probably have 1,000 things around your craft room or your house. Remember, just don't use stuff that you would normally use in the kitchen or that you are going to use in the kitchen in your craft room, because some things can be toxic. I like those little scallops though. That's cute. Let's see. And again, I could just go in and maybe I just want to paint some hearts. I could just do like this. Paint some little hearts on there. Let's do that. All I'm doing is taking my paintbrush and loading it with paint, and we're just creating a little heart. So it's nothing that is difficult or hard. It's just taking your time, trying to do your best as you're laying it down there. Those are just a couple of things you could do, just some dots if you wanted to. If you don't have an actual dot maker, you can use the end of your paintbrush to do that. So maybe we'll go down and we'll pick out another one of these and just do some little dots right here. Now what you're doing at this point is just adding your extra special touches. Now if you've never used a dot maker or made dots, it is best if you reload after every one. Otherwise, you may come up with a different shape that you don't want or an incomplete circle. So just always try to remember just to reload after each one of those. Try to get two in here. I'm kind of having to squeeze that one in. What's another easy something that we could do? We could just do that swirl, right? Just where you just paint just a little curved edge. Let's do that. We'll do that on this one up here. Let me go and start. Go up, down, and I'm trying to go to the top and the bottom to fill that space. All right, so you could do something like that, right? Something as easy as that. And that's just a little fabric paint. Again, that's what I happen to have, doing things with fabrics. So if you don't have fabric paint, I would say probably use something like the Apple Barrel multi-surface paint markers or an acrylic multi-surface paint. So those are a couple of options just in case you don't have the exact same things that I have to work with. Alrighty, so that one's fun. And let's do some words, because it's always kind of fun to add some words to something. A piece of fabric off here. I like the way that this end piece looks, so I'm actually going to use that. And to get started, let's just see if we can rip this down a little bit and make it a interesting piece of fabric, right? Just give it a little cut and a little rip, and it just brings out some of the character of that. I need to make this one a little shorter. Take it to about right here, I think. front. Or you know what? I could just stamp right onto there. I know exactly what I'm going to stamp today. So I may do that twice. I may do my stamps twice. I'm just using my permanent waterproof ink from Ranger. But the thing that I do want to do on this one, which is so funny because they're getting ready to call for snow. Well, they're calling for snow. They're calling for a really bad weekend this weekend. And I want to do Good Day Sunshine. Good Day Sunshine. All right, I am just trying to get a little bit organized before I start jumping into this. I'm going to stamp straight onto my tag. A lot of times I would just stamp onto something like this and just add that saying on there. You just let life surprise you, be your beautiful self. You are my favorite. Oh, happy day. Just things that inspire you. Or maybe mean things. Maybe you want to be mean. Get a little snarky. And this is actually an example of something else that I like to do. Whenever I am stamping like a saying that I like, I do like to keep a scrap sheet of paper, material, something like that, and do that 3 or 4 times. And then I will just add those to my stash as well. Just add them in so that if I want something that's already created and ready to go, I can get my hands on it easier than having to drag out my ink pad and just do one little saying or whatever. So just a nice little time saver is all that is. Now we have our cute little tag that we have made. We put this one to the side to dry, and we have a couple more projects to take a look at that I use for scrap materials. The other thing to note is that even if you don't have batting material, that is, if you have a material, you can still do this. I did this one using a cardboard tag. This is just from a Cheerios box. Kind of the back of that. We're going to use the top because I like the way all those little Cheerios are looking. And basically, all you're going to do is if you have another tag that you can use as an example, then that makes it really easy. And you can get tags off of clothing, when you go shopping, just different places. So just save those tags. You can use those as templates just to cut out other tags. For this, I did go ahead and grab some more scraps that I have. I was just going to try to find a couple that match. I think these two match. And these two, I think, would go good together, except this is not big enough to go on that specific tag. Let's put these back to the side. I'll just do the same thing. And again, I am using fabric Mod Podge for this also, but try whatever glue you have handy and see if that works. And if it doesn't, grab some of this kind of thing. Fabric and paper are so interchangeable. I mean, so you could totally, everybody makes paper tags. I don't think you see material tags quite as much, but it is a great way to use up that fabric. I'm going to line that up so that I do not have to cut as much. Give it a good press. We don't want any air bubbles in there. We've got that pressed down really well, and I'm just going to lay this to the side to dry. Then I will go back and on the other side glue this piece. And so then I'll have both sides of my tag completed. And I won't make you wait through that. You know how to do all those things. So once I got my tag made with my paper, for this one I did ink the edges with my black ink, and I don't like it. So there you go. And I have a hole punch that will actually punch through a lot of things. It is just makes a very tiny little hole. And so that is how I ended up tying off something to the top of this one. You could do the same way we did the fabric example, and as you're doing that back piece, just get your fabric loop glued on as you were doing that back side. You can go in and decorate it however you want to. On this one, all I did was add different stitches all over this with my fabric paint. So another way to do that if you do not have batting. All right, so this one is, I guess, number 3. And these are just little elements that I create for different purposes. I had some really small pieces of fabric, and I just go ahead and cut the heart shape out. And then whenever I'm ready, I can go in and let's just fussy cut around this little guy. And then you're probably sitting there thinking, well, that's fine, but what do you do with that once you have that? What is the purpose of this little heart? Or whatever shape you happen to be doing. You could do any shape you wanted to. But what I do with these little pieces like this is I can add them onto something else. So maybe I want to add whatever word. This one I've got love on a little piece of lace. And you can just add that on there as a 3D element. That's probably not the best example, but you could add that on as a 3D element to your tag. The other place that I think of that I would use these is if you are doing some kind of clothing alterations, then you could actually add those on as an element to whatever you're redoing. Like you could add these onto a shirt or a pair of blue jeans. These are done with fabric Mod Podge, so yes, they would work. You could use them like confetti, right? So you could use them on a table to decorate with, or you could just drop a few of them in some snail mail to have something special when the recipient opens up their mail. And journals, absolutely, these are great to be able to add a fun element to a journal. You may or may not have made envelopes for your journal if you're a journaling person. This one is just a little example, but you could have this as part of your journal with this little interactive element. Maybe you're taking your best friend a birthday card. You could totally just add that as an additional element on your card. So there are places for little things like this. The only thing I ever do with these is hearts, but you could do any shape you could think of, right? You could do circles, you could do squares, you could do diamonds, whatever. That is just a fun way to use up really small pieces of scraps. All right, let's see what else we have over here. So we just talked about the little envelopes. We make the little envelopes. If you have, a lot of the things that I do are cut quilting squares. So whenever I'm cutting those squares, sometimes I have some left over, and which is the case here. And I went ahead and I have put fabric Mod Podge on both pieces of these already, and it just gives them a different texture. It just makes them easier to work with. You can see that would be so much harder to work with, but once you put that fabric Mod Podge on there, it just makes it easier for you to work with. The other thing it does is it keeps raveling at bay. I don't know if you know that, but so I can trim off these little edges and clean them up a little bit. And we are just going to make little fabric envelope. People do this all the time with paper, but they don't always necessarily do it with fabric. You can use one piece of fabric like I have with these, right? So I created these sweet little envelopes using just a piece of fabric. And these would also be good for journals. And then this one I did completely with my Mod Podge Fabric. And this one, I did the same thing. I put a coating of Mod Podge on my fabric to make it easier to work with. But then I went in and I glued this part and then sewed my edges. I added a cute little button on there, and so that would be ready to go into a journal or tuck a special note in or something like that. How did we do that? We simply had a perfect square, whatever size you want. I'm using scraps, so most of mine are small. And I could make this one to where it's a more decorative envelope, where when you open it, it's also pretty on the inside. And if I wanted to do that, then I would glue or sew these two pieces of fabric. Let's do that. Let's do one that is going to be two-sided. And to glue these pieces together, I'm just going to mainly hit the edges of this. I'll put a little bit in the middle, but most of this is just going to go around the edges. All right, let's lay that down. Make sure we have that on there. All right, I am not even going to wait for this to dry today. We're just going to go for it. We need to decide if we want which side we want to be the inside and which side we want to be the outside. Now what you want to do is you want these pieces to come just to the middle to meet, right? You can measure these out so they are perfect or whatever, or you can eyeball it like I am doing right now. What I do want to do is I want to give those a good press to work with. You could use an iron to do that if you wanted to. Just don't get glue on your iron. I'm going to fold this up and I'm going to give it a good press again. And I'm going to give it another good press. Now the reason I say we're giving it a good press is because we are trying to create a cutting line for our envelope. Because what happens if you have too much material right here, it kind of bulges out. So you can either plan to tuck that in, or you can plan to cut it like the shape of a regular envelope, like a real envelope. This has created these little triangles right here in each of these corners, and I am going to take and cut each one of these down and get rid of those little triangles, and that is going to remove that bulk. Now you can do all this with a ruler and measure everything out and get the measurements perfect. I generally don't do that. If I'm doing it for something, I don't know, that I really feel like that needs to be the case, then what I will do is I would put it on a ruler like this because that's what I happen to have. But it's okay. For the most part, you can just eyeball these things. They may not be perfect, but if you want them to be perfect, one of those square rulers will help you out with that quite a bit. So I'm just going to put a little bit of glue right here first on this tip. Glue that down, and then you're going to put fabric glue or whatever glue you happen to be using and get that off there. Down through here to glue up the side of this envelope. Pull that up, press that down, make sure nothing is sticking on the inside, and so we have that completed. Then it's just a matter of however you're going to do something with the top of your envelope, whether you want to put a button or On this one, I did a little artificial flower, and then I took one of those, what are they called? Not a push pin. So I took one of these and put down in the middle of that flower to create that look. And then this one is just a little button. And I didn't sew that button on there because I didn't want you to be able to see it on the back. So I just went ahead and threaded the button and then just glued the button on to that envelope. So there is just another fun way to use those spare fabrics. Decorate that however you like at that point. And let's see, do I have really small fabric scraps like these? There are still ways to use those up. And actually, so this one is a hair clip, and I just basically decoupaged that material onto this clip. Now I'm not using it for a hair clip. I'm actually going to use it for a journal, but use it however you like. Here are some of those fabric hearts. Let me see if I have any more in here that I've used for different things. So I've used those for paper clips, and I just put a heart on each side. Push pins, what are these things called? Oh my gosh, I know you're sitting there trying to help me, and I just can't hear you. So, and even little wooden clothespin clips. Really small pieces of fabric. You can use them for things like this. Just add that one piece of fabric. I actually added one piece on this side and one piece on that side. So you've got that. Or, again, going back to these pieces, once I've used them, I usually have like scraps of these. If I use this for the journal cover, I may have just a small amount left over. And when I have something like that, I will just find a clothespin and use that on my clothespin. So you can certainly do something similar to that. And I think that that is really all that I have for you today as far as using up your fabric scraps. So what all do we have? Let's take a look one more time. And one great way to do that is to create something larger and then cut that down for whatever your smaller projects are going to be. We've got our tags, which we used those for. Those are always a lot of fun. We created some envelopes here. And we made these sweet little hearts that we can use for different things. Little love hearts. And then we have some fun little office supplies that we were able to make happen using those fabric scraps. I hope you enjoyed today's video. And if you have other ideas, oh, I've got another idea. You could use these pins to make something using these smaller shapes that you have created. Thanks for joining me today. If you stuck around until this point, thank you very much. Let me know what you thought about these projects, or if you have other ideas for projects with your scrap material. I would love to see those in the comments. Thanks for sticking around. Get out there, grab your scraps, make something fun, and absolutely share those with me on Instagram or Facebook. All right? Until next time, bye.